untouched wilderness, pretty much. What you see and feel out there, you put inside there and you carry it with you.
Big fab, everybody. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Scott Mathieson, and we are live, and it's fantastic to have you here listening to this webinar on how you guys can immigrate to Australia. It is certainly an interesting time in our world, and the opportunity to move to Australia is as good as any time in history, and the history that we've been doing this, which is over 20 years. So we're going to get straight into it. I'm going to introduce you to our amazing panelists who have been in this industry for a very, very long time and can provide you with expert help. And then I'll take you through what we're going to cover off today, so that at the end of this webinar, you've got something really concrete and tactile to take away with you to move on to the next step. So I'll start with Nazim Lalazari, born in born in the USA and grew up in Western Sydney. Nazim, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name's Nassim. And as Scott mentioned, I was born in the States, but I grew up in Australia, went to university in Western Sydney, where I studied law. I've been with Working In now for over 11 years, and I've helped literally thousands of people make the move, specifically down under. And I'm excited to talk to everybody about what that process looks like. Thanks.
Thank you, Nazim. Great to see you. And all the way over in the UK, UK evening is our journey expert, Goddard. Paul, welcome.
Hi everyone. Great to see you on here. Like Nazim, I've lived in multiple countries, I guess, from the UK originally, and moved to New Zealand eventually, and spent 18 years in New Zealand. And during that time, I think I've spent the last 10, 12, 15 years helping people move to Australia and New Zealand, in both places. And that journey of emigrating is a very personal one. It's life-changing. It has risk attached to it. And hopefully what we're going to show you is how to minimize the risks, maximize the opportunities, give you a way forward.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. And yeah, just a little bit about Working In. We've been in this industry for over 20 years. We basically set up this to help people migrate and to connect people with employers, because there was always this disconnect between people who are offshore and employers in Australia and New Zealand that required skilled people. So that's how Working In was born. We spent a lot of our time in the 2000s running really large scale expos in places like London and Joburg, Dublin, Manchester, where employers from all over the world would come and meet with potential migrants. Now it's all online. We do things online, but we also do bespoke, tailored journeys for everybody. So every single person, I guarantee, on this webinar today has a different situation, different age, different occupation, different place that you want to go to, different family situation, different life history, different qualifications. Everything is different. So we just found that you can't put everybody into one package and go, hey, you can move to Australia like this. Every single person and every specific journey has to be tailor-made. And so that's what we essentially do. So at the end of this webinar, there'll be something that you can take the next step on, but you'll get a much clearer idea of the steps that you need to take, because it is a series of steps, and that's what we kind of help you with. So look, just to briefly cover off what we'll look at. There's a screen coming up in a couple of seconds. Here we go. So we're going to just a quick overview of where things are at with the borders and immigration. Where do you start? Of course. Can you make the move? That's mostly and really important. So we're going to be talking about, can you make the move? Do you have the qualifications? Are you of the right age? These sorts of things. And what are the big questions that you'll have, and how do we actually unlock some of your blocks? And that's what we're all about really here. It's not about sitting down and talking to you about all the different subclasses that are out there and all the different legalities. Look, that is something that we do, obviously. Nazim's a migration lawyer. She has a big team of people below her that do this stuff day in, day out. but we're not going to sit here today and tell you all about Australian immigration. Way too much to learn and not that exciting. What you're wanting to know is, how do I get there? What are the steps? What are the blocks? And what are the opportunities? So first and foremost, I just want to show you a little picture of Nazim. Sorry, Nazim, to embarrass you straight away. But maybe you could take this through this, because it's actually quite good for setting the scene.
Yeah, so this is a picture from 40 odd years ago. That is the day that my family arrived in Australia. So that's my dad in the dapper white coat sitting on the, I guess you call it the fence. My mum's standing there with a bag in her hand. I think that's my nappy bag, and a friend holding me. So we had just migrated from the US. My dad had a master's in computer science, which was a big deal back in the day. And so we migrated as skilled, under the skilled category, which is, the main way that people continue to migrate to Australia, and what we're going to talk about a little bit more today. So that's us straight from the airport. My parents talk about how they were absolutely smashed. And after that photo was taken, they were fed and they slept for 3 days. But that was the start of, my life and my journey in Australia. It afforded me the opportunity to grow up in Western Sydney, to go to university, and to be here today speaking to you guys.
And I think the most interesting thing about that, Nazim, is, in that time, nothing has really changed. I mean, back then it was a really big deal. You can see it's a big deal. You're moving your entire life. The planning would have been absolutely critical. The planning would have been the biggest part of the journey. It would have taken a long time, but at the same time, it was absolutely life-changing, because, you've moved country. And I think, Paul, you've seen people do this thousands, maybe tens of thousands of times. You'd have to agree that nothing really has changed in terms of migration over this time.
No, I mean, policy obviously changes, but apart from that, but the whole sort of process of moving is the same. It's just different hurdles and barriers. They move the goalposts basically, but the goal's still there. And as long as you don't lose sight of the goal, and as long as you've got a clear route towards the goal, then you can get there. And it's often a case of just committing. That's usually the first hardest step, is going, I want, not only do I want to do this, but I'm now going to commit to doing this. And that really is that first important step. And that's always the same.
Yeah. So look, I think we're a little bit different, because we're not going to delve into the policy. As I said before, in our experience, what we've just talked about is that this is a journey with steps. You take the steps step by step, obviously, but in the right order, at the right time, sometimes concurrently, so that you're saving the most amount of money and getting here as soon as possible. And really, that for us is what this is all about. You want to move, you want to migrate. How do we do that with the fewest barriers, at the least hassle, and the most frictionless pathway, if you like? But look, it does require having a really good, sound knowledge of the immigration system. And we do strongly recommend that whatever you do, you use a MARA or an RMA agent. I'm just going to bring up on screen what this is about, so Nazim can describe it, because I think this is absolutely imperative regardless of what you do. So I'm bringing up this screen now. And Nazim, can you just tell everybody what it is to be a MARA agent, please?
So a registered migration agent is someone who has the legal authority to provide you with immigration advice specifically related to Australia. So obviously it's really important that you get the right advice, because it can be a complex and confusing process. So if you don't use a professional, you're not necessarily protected either. So the reason why you would need to use an RMA is because what we do is governed by the Office of the MARA, or OMARA, and basically they keep us in line, make sure that we're doing our CPD every year, that we know what we're doing, that our client fund is working properly. We're not doing anything that can put your process and I guess the cost in investment, not just your time, at risk. So that's what a an RMA is. And if you look behind me just here, am I pointing one? There? That's my license, for example. So myself and the other RMAs in the team, every year we need to renew our license to be able to continue to provide immigration advice for Australia.
Yeah. Can you just quickly touch on that fund? Because I think the fund is actually a critical part. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because migration is normally a once in a lifetime journey. And, there is money involved, and you want to make sure that you're not being ripped off or swindled or handing your money over to people that you'll never see again. So describe the fund and how that gives any people that are migrating assurances and insurance.
Sure. So the client fund is basically where funds are kept on your behalf until they are earned. So for example, if you're, same way as you go to a lawyer, a lot of what we do is modeled on the same principles. If, for example, you're paying for a whole service in advance, it's only as each part of that service is completed that portion is released and then sort of earned by us, so to speak. So if, for example, we had someone tell us the other day that unfortunately their family circumstances have changed and they can no longer migrate. So the work that we've done up to a point, obviously we'd earned that, but all the rest that's in there, we now just refund to them, and obviously we hope the best for them and their family.
Thank you, Nazim. Look, I must make a point about the chat. Please send in your questions. We'll try and answer them as we go. We don't have anyone in the background sort of answering these questions surreptitiously. It's only us, so we'll do our best. If we can't get to you during this webinar, we'll certainly keep on answering questions after. So don't concern yourself if you don't get the answer. And look, most of the questions that we see are very, very specific, so it's very difficult to answer specific questions. We'll have a solution for you soon once I try to get through some of the overview stuff. Talking about overview, here's a bit of an overview. So obviously, with migration, employment is critical. Even if you're able to obtain a visa that doesn't require employment, you most likely would like a job once you arrive in Australia. The good news is that unemployment rate in Australia is at pretty much a 50-year low, so 4%, which is quite incredible. And that really means that there are huge opportunities for people that are wanting to migrate. The states, the infrastructure that's being poured into every state off the back of COVID is phenomenal. And it's creating jobs, not just in infrastructure and construction and civil engineering, but hospitals are being built, and schools are being built. And Australia is doing a little bit of a catch up on population as well. So, one of the things that we do want to sort of cover off are some of the barriers, because it might be that you've got a job, or you need a job, or you want to move to Australia, but there's always barriers. Paul, can you just explain some of the barriers that people might actually come up against and how we can actually solve those?
Yeah, the main barriers are quite easy to understand if you put yourself in the employer's shoes, basically. An employer who's looking to hire anyone from overseas is going to a huge commitment, time, effort, money, resources, and they're looking for the best person for their business. So the barriers that you face are competition with Australians. People are on the ground in Australia. Competition with the hundreds of thousands, millions of people maybe who want to move to Australia, because Australia is definitely in the top 3 destinations in the world that people want to move to. And, you've got to get a job in Australia, you've got to basically remove those barriers that stop the employers engaging with you. And one amazing way that Australia can offer the ability to remove that barrier is, a couple of the visas that you can get basically give you residence before you've even got the job offer. Now, if you've got a residence visa in your hand, you're leveling that playing field. You're kind of almost just like an Australian. You might not actually physically be in Australia at that time, but that visa makes it a hell of a lot easier, because from an employer's perspective, you've done the hard bit. you've got the right to work and live in Australia, and that removes a lot of those barriers just fall down instantly. There's many different visas for Australia, as Nazim can tell you, it's about finding out the best one that works for you, works for the employer.
Absolutely, and that's fascinating. And I think I'll just jump onto Nazim here and let her run through what those visas are, because as I understand it, as I know, sorry, from a skilled perspective, there's two types of visas. One where you can actually get through on the points and you don't actually require a job offer, and there's the other sort of route where you will need a job offer in order to apply. Nazim, can you run through that? And whilst you're doing that, could you just talk about age as well? I can see already on the chat there's a lot of questions around age. It's always a hot topic, and let's get really specific around that, because for people that are 45, So here's the slide on the actual subclasses. We're not going to go into this in too much detail, but at least Nazim will be able to show you that there are different pathways.
So these aren't all the subclasses. These are just the main ones for skilled migration.
Yep.
And these are the ones that most will be looking to qualify under in order to have that pathway. And what's important to note is that each one has a slightly different criteria, but eventually they will all lead to permanent residence. So you can see that, we've got provisional sort of listed and under subclass 491, and even the 494 is kind of in that vein. These are points-based visas with the idea that we talked about competition just earlier. And what happens is that you're competing with everybody else in order to be selected to move ahead under these visa subclasses. So it's up to you to do everything that you can to put yourself in the best possible position, so that, it sounds terrible, so that they pick you over the guy sitting next to you who's just as desperate to move. And then when you add in the fact that there's other considerations such as age, different subclasses have different sort of age waivers available. There's not necessarily an age waiver for the 189 or 190, but if we're going sort of the regional visas, or we're relying on Dharma, that's not even listed there because there's just so many options, we can, depending on your occupation, we can find if there is an age waiver available. So normally you need to have applied for your permanent residence before you're 45 years of age, unless we're going the waiver route. Now, in the last couple of weeks, a lot of the assessments that we've been doing and checking is we're having to look and find what that process might look like, because we know that 45 is not actually that old. We live quite long lives now. Most people might only be starting their families around that time, but for whatever reason, the immigration policy in Australia stops at that age unless you find a way around it. So I guess the main takeaways is that there's lots of options, and each one will have slightly different requirements, but what we do is try to find what that pathway looks like for you, so you can overcome all of those different barriers that we just spoke about.
Yeah, so look, there's a lot going on there, Nazim, and I appreciate for you listeners and viewers that for the first time and you're hearing all this, there's a lot to take in. Essentially, in order to move to Australia, you have to fulfill a points criteria if you're coming through on the employment route. If you're not coming through on the employment route, you might be coming through on the family or the partner or some kind of investment route, which, if that's the case and you've got millions of pounds or dollars or whatever it might be, talk to us separately. But the vast majority of people that migrate to Australia will come through some type of employment-related visa that we had posted up before. And that really requires points. So the first step really for you is to kind of put a stake in the ground, and I've got a slide around this, and do one of our free appraisal forms. It's a really simple form. You fill in the details, you send it to us, and we'll be able to say, look, it looks as though you potentially meet criteria. It's a very simple form. It's definitely not going to tell you precisely whether you meet it, but we can give you a ballpark as to whether we think that you meet that criteria. I'll get our IT guy to put that link up, and so you can actually fill in that form and put a stake in the ground. So that's what we call it, is that, we've always talked about this whole journey to Australia and what does that mean and how do I actually begin it? one of the things Paul always talks about is that, people out there, they're researching the internet, but you've got to start somewhere. And so for us, this free appraisal form is a starting point. It's just a stake where you can go, okay, I'm going to commit to this process. I'm going to see how far I can go. Let's fill out this form. And from there, kind of a momentum starts to take hold. Paul, can you add to that in any way? I know this is one of your pet topics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we've only got to just look at the questions in the chat room that are happening right now. The most common question in that chat room is, am I eligible to move to Australia? I mean, it really is. I'm this occupation, I'm that occupation, I'm this occupation. The reality is we need more information from you. We can generally say, yes, a nurse is eligible to move to Australia, but we won't know until we look at you, because as you said earlier, Scott, everyone is different. Everyone's got different things in their life, different circumstances, different work histories, everything else. And just getting those initial answers and moving away from the internet. The internet is great because everything is on the internet. We all know that. But the problem with the internet is it's not about you and your move. It's not personalized. It's pages of information. And to get it right, you're running the risk. You've got to literally be on the right page at the right time that's relevant to you. And finding that page can take a long time. And you'll read information that conflicts with each other. You'll read information that's bad. You'll read information that's good. And more importantly, you'll miss the really important key information that you didn't find because you didn't know it was there and you didn't know you needed it. That's where talking to people who know what they're doing, who are, as we said, registered Mara agents and people who've been working in the industry for a long time, that's how you can fast track that. Cut through the noise, cut through the internet, fill out a simple form, get a simple answer, and then move forward in steps. Breaking the journey down into steps is what makes it manageable, and it's what minimizes the risks and maximizes the opportunities.
Yeah. So you can't really make a decision, Paul, until you know whether you are eligible. Yeah. Once you know that you are eligible, then we can take you on a process of consulting, understanding your specific requirements. And sometimes, by the way, your specific requirements or needs are not going to be met initially, are they, Nazim? Plenty of situations where someone might have applied to us, but they it might be age, it might be occupation, or the occupations don't match with the list. I mean, that is worth discussing. But I kind of describe Nazim as a kind of a magician in a way, because she somehow manages to go, well, you don't fit there, but I can conjure up you to be able to fit over here, but it means this for you. And oftentimes it might be, look, I wanted to move to Perth, but only South Australia, for example, is open for me. And so most people would go, well, that's great. I'll grab that for 2 years. Nazim, do you want to sort of clarify that, I guess? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we talked about those different subclasses earlier. Some of them did and some of them didn't require a job offer in order to, to move through. With migration to Australia, as you know, there's lots of different subclasses and everyone's circumstances are different. And so what we try to do, as Scott said, is try to fit you in different boxes to make it that you can reach the end goal. Now, the way that you get to that end goal might not be what you imagined initially, but that's what our job is to find what that pathway will be. So I see someone who's asked that I'm a lorry driver, can I go? Yeah, you can definitely go. Do you like the particular pathway that we might identify as is the way that you need to get there? And so if you're committed to the move, then there's always a way, but you're going to have to do the steps as well. So it's, my husband talks about how I always want to, eat healthy and have lots of energy to run after the kids and the dog, but I don't like to exercise. So if I don't do that, I can't get the outcome. So it's the same thing with migration. Australian immigration is quite complex. It is quite difficult, but there is always a way, as long as you're willing to be committed to that journey.
Exactly right. So look, I mean, in those questions, I see someone's asked, is the railway industry big in Australia? Yeah, well,
it's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a big country. but it's also what kind of railway does that mean? I mean, we are working with a major client in Australia at the moment that's wanting railway engineers, but specifically that's out west, that's in the mining industry. We've got another client that's east and looking at, similar to, overground travel, like the London Tube. So it really just does vary. And I think this is why you can't ask broad questions, because you're not going to get the answers that you want from a very broad overview from us. So how do you make the move? Paul, do you just want to run through this, please? Because we've only got a few minutes left.
I think you touched on it earlier, Scott. To be able to even commit to the move, you need the answers to all your questions and you need a clear way forward. You can't commit to the move until you've done that. And as I've said before, using the internet to get the answers and a way forward is not the best way of doing it. So the initial step with us, it's dead easy and it's completely free, is fill out that first link, the free online assessment. That's what gives us the basic details that we need. And then we actually have people who will look at that form that you filled out and decide if you do, look like you meet the criteria. And if you do, and things look good, and you look like you do meet the criteria, then we invite you to move forward to the next step. As I say, we do this in steps. The next step is where you can actually complete a full assessment form with us. This is details for all the family, all the information we need, your CVs, etc. You upload it all. It's all done online. You fill it all out and you submit it to us. That goes to the visa team and they'll look through all the information. They're going to work Nazim's magic. They're going to do the magical stuff. They're going to literally take your information, compare it with current immigration policy, look at the options that you've got, the best way forwards, and then they'll email you a report. So that report is going to it's going to clarify that you can make the move and the ways that you can make the move. Once you've got the report, whilst that's good and it gives you, confirmation, what you actually need to know then is how does it work? So as well as the report, you're going to get a consultation. So you're going to get a consultation with a real person who's going to use that report as a blueprint to outline your journey to Australia. So based on the report, here's the steps you're going to take. Here's the hurdles you're facing. Here's how you overcome them. Here's the timeframes. Here's the costs involved. That's where you get all your answers to all your questions and you get a clear way forward. Then at the end of that call, you're in the best position and you can make a decision based on that information. That's it. That's all you need to do. Forget about looking all over Google. Forget about watching Wanted Down Under and all these other TV programs. You can do that, and that's great, and it's wonderful, and it makes you happy, but it doesn't help you move. If you want to actually commit, stick a stake in the ground, fill out that free online form, give us your information, and we'll go through it.
Yeah, and Nazim, the full assessment, I mean, there's quite a lot of work involved in that, right? So what is the cost for that? Because that's really the start point. That's where people will know this is how I do it.
Yeah. So the actual full detailed assessment, where myself or one of the RMAs will sit down for several hours and go through everything, we charge Australian $395. And sometimes it can take longer than people like. They want an answer straight away. But as we've explained, Australian immigration policy is quite detailed. There's a lot of things to consider. I saw someone asked a question about a health concern for a family member. In those instances, we might have to come back and say, you've provided some information, but we need more. We need to figure out if there's a way we can work with it or work around it or whatever it is. But that's why there's a cost. It's a lot of work, and it's legal advice that we're going to be providing you with.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to be 100% clear for everybody, there's two steps. The first step is this free appraisal form that's in the chat, and that won't take long for us to come back to you on that. Maybe a couple of days, we'll be able to say to you, "Well, you look as though you meet the criteria," and that's the first step. The second step, what Nazim's just talked about, is once you meet the criteria, we invite you to a consultation with Paul or one of the other advisors and journey managers, and then you can complete the full assessment that Nazim's talked about, and that full assessment is the one that has a cost attached to it. But that's really going to be your blueprint. You know, after you've got that, you will know beyond doubt what your best pathway is to Australia. Okay. Now, I guess what we haven't really discussed too much, and we're kind of moving out of time, is the employment factor. I mean, Australia's a big country. What I did say before is that the unemployment rate is 4%. There are a lot of opportunities. If you go down the permanent residency route, and if you're able to go down that route, and if you do qualify for that route, it certainly makes it a lot easier. And that's what Paul mentioned before. And Nazim, you have a number of clients on the 189 or 190 pathway. Can you just get really clear about what the difference is between the 189 and the 190? Because we would really hope that as many people on this webinar qualify for that.
Yeah, so these are the, I guess you'd call them the main independent pathways. The 189 is an occupation, it's a visa subclass that relies on an occupational list called the MLTSSL. And you just need to have an occupation on that list and have sufficient points in order to apply and be, to move. This visa is probably the best available one in that it's got the least amount of conditions tied to it. But it's obviously the hardest to get because, it's a narrow list. You've got the most competition. And so a lot of times people don't quite meet the subclass 189 and need to look at the subclass 190 instead. Now, the subclass 190 is available to everyone whose occupation is on the MLTSSL, but also on the short-term skilled occupation list. So you've got different lists, and the different occupation lists will allow you to apply for different visa subclasses. With the 190, anyone who's on the short-term list as well as the medium long-term list qualifies. But to proceed under that particular subclass, you need something called state nomination. So you're looking at one of the seven states or territories in Australia, and you're saying, I've got these skills, please will you pick me and give me 5 extra points and move me to the front of the processing queue. So each state will have a different list within their state. They get an allocation from the government each year as to how many PR applications they can support and basically give away. And so if you're on one of those lists in those states, then it's an extra additional process, but it does mean that you're committing to that state for at least a couple of years for the added benefit of the extra points and to move through the process faster.
Fantastic. Look, and the reason why I really wanted to bring that up before the end of the webinar was because once you've actually completed your free appraisal and then gone on to the paid eligibility assessment, what Nazim's team will be doing as much as possible is seeing if we can get you to qualify for either a 189, 190. As Nazim said, it's kind of like the best possible work visa you can have because, as Paul said at the beginning, you actually have permanent residency before you move. Providing you obviously qualify. So can you imagine what it's like to go to an employer and go, hey, look, I've got PR, can you give me a job? It just breaks down so many barriers. So the big thing that we'll be doing is trying to get you into that band, because that just makes such a big difference to your entire journey. So look, that's why we mentioned that, and that's why it's so important to do that assessment really. To see if you can actually qualify for that 189 or 190. And what happens when you move? Paul, maybe you could run through this because I know that people thinking, gosh, what do I do now? I've got to jump on the internet. I'm moving to Australia. Gosh, what does that mean for my dog? How do I move my pension? So let's have a quick chat about that, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've shipped dogs all over the place, down under and back to the UK and back again and everything else, and probably be shipping them back again when I go back down under. But basically, there's so many other things to think about that aren't visa related. You're relocating yourself or your family and your kids. You've got schools. You've got to think about bank accounts. You've got to think, like, say, about what do I do with my pension? How do I tie up all my loose ends, in the country I'm in to with the country that I'm moving to? What about flights? What about shipping? There's so many different rules around those things as well. And again, you've got a choice. You can either trawl the internet and go round and round in circles and take a lot of risk, or you can work with us. We've got a whole bunch of relocation partners. You can see them up on the screen. They just flashed up there. I mean, we've got pet shippers, we've got pension transfer companies, we've got banks, we've got, removal companies, shipping companies, whatever you can think of. Part of preparing you for the move, part of our service is actually doing that, preparing you for the move, putting you in touch with relocation partners, giving you all the information you need about living in Australia and how it works and what it looks like, taking you through the journey, which is the visa journey and everything else, but providing support to you right throughout that process until you're settled in Australia. Even when your visas are issued, you'll still have ways of reaching out to us if you need advice and support. And it's really important because it gives peace of mind. I think it's one of the key differences with working in, if you're looking at other visa agents and things like that compared to what working in do, is working in wasn't set up originally, was it, Scott, to do visas? It wasn't what we were doing. It was set up to help employers find people from overseas, and the jobs and the visas are such an integral part of this process. We're quite unique in having those connections, but because we've had those connections with seeing it from the employer's perspectives and the migrant's perspective, we know the big picture. And most of our team have actually moved from all over the world, in our offices. We've got a real multinational team, and we just get it. We just get the big picture stuff, and we've put steps in place that help you on every single one of those steps.
Fantastic, Paul. And it's all true. So that's good to hear. And I love your passion. And after 20 years, you've still got all this energy to help people. It's absolutely brilliant. So thanks very much for joining us and on your evening, because it must be like 8:45 there. So look, I think we'll wrap this up now. We've done this for 39 minutes. We said it would be 40 minutes. So unless you've got anything to say, Nazim, just as a final goodbye and wrap up.
Yeah, just, if you really are interested and want to move to Australia, the first step is to find out, if it's even going to be possible. So do the free appraisal. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just a little bit of time. And I'll have a look and we'll say, yep, no, or maybe. And then you can decide, how much further you take it from there. But once you know, and it's just easier to decide whether to push ahead or just put it aside and think of something else.
Once you know, momentum carries you through. Okay, Nazim, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and to everybody who's joined us and listened to this webinar. We really hope to see you down under one day. Start your journey. You know how to do that. Click on the link. Let's get going, and have a great evening or afternoon or wherever you are in the world. Goodbye.
Bye.